morning, everybody. My name is Ernst, and I will be your lecturer and workshop tutor and assessor and assistant in the upcoming 10 weeks. And if you don't mind, I record the lectures, not the workshops, but the lectures, because I know that in the season's holidays, also known as Christmas break, when you reopen the book and all the material, you could be assisted by some recordings which I will upload in due time in a YouTube channel, so easily accessible. We are about to start a journey that ends with a bachelor degree on your side in 7 months. Upon completion of most of you of a law-related bachelor thesis. Who's planning to do a bachelor thesis in the law area? Sort of half of you, and that means that those hands enrolled in the sort of labeled law minor track, and the others are not in that track? You are. But then you could opt for a thesis outside the law area. Oh, I thought that the thesis was a part of it, but there's an option. There's an option. Cool. But prior to that, which starts in the spring, we will have this sort of assessment. Let's immediately answer one of the questions. If you produce a course description of 23 pages, then there's always the risk that there are contradictory items, and one is on the open book nature of the final written in-class assessment, and the answer is yes, it is an open book exam, which is bad news, because then the questions are more complicated, and there's a lot of material. We will discuss that in depth in the workshops. What is the priority within that long list, obviously. So there's no time during the assessment to unpack your textbook out of the plastic and then try to hit the correct answers, unless you're brilliant. So nothing is impossible. Yes, a question in this stage?
Sorry, just a quick question. For open book, can we also use computers if we were able to for the last exam?
Did I see computers last year? Yes, I saw computers. Yes. So digital books are included, and notes and the like. We will discuss today the expectations. What are we going to learn? What is the idea of a class on corporate law in an economics degree? What are we getting out of it? And what are the seeds that I would like to plant into your system, your intellectual system, that hopefully bear fruit in either the thesis, bachelor level, master level, or later on in your career. So we will discuss that today, and we will hit the floor running by touching upon the first chapter of the textbook of Kaakman and others, which we will continue in the next upcoming week. Talking about the next upcoming week, now that you're still fresh, on the Thursday, the 23rd of November, you have your career day, meaning that the workshops of that day are replaced, removed, rescheduled to 1 week later at 5 o'clock. So on November the 30th, I will put a message on Blackboard with the same content, but now that you know, on November the 30th, we will have the regular workshops at 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock, and then a collective second workshop at 5 o'clock to catch up with all the class assignments and so forth. So those are some household messages and announcements. let's introduce myself in connection with this course and in connection with my statement earlier that I would like to plant some seeds in your system. I'm an attorney at law, but devoted and falling in love with higher education. So that is sort of 90%, 10% division, 90% education, including research, and 10% practice. One of the sort of broad learning goals of this course is that you know a little bit about corporate law, what your lawyer you will hire in the future will discuss with you. And so one of these ideas of a potential career as an economist is that you work, and we will do that in class in the workshop, to investigate and inquire what are your actual career plans, but hypothetically you end up in all kinds of different organizations, and one of the patterns is that you are confronted with professional jurists, attorneys at law, law firms, etc., and they will provide you with legal services. So one of the learning outcomes of this course is that you exercise to cope with these people, and I am part of these people. So if after 10 weeks you can cope with me, that is one of the learning outcomes. So that's one. Secondly, I am interested in research, and the study in economics is heavily research based. You deal with a lot of theories and models, and one of the, let's say, benefits of studying this type of course you are in is that you train your brains, and your employers hire you for those brains, not necessarily for a certain economic theory along the road. So it is brain training, and that is what I like to study myself, and that is what I included and implemented in this course. So a lot of uncertainties, questions without answers, and I know, that is why I presented to you in this way, that it is annoying for students, because one of the perspectives is also this sort of more efficiency geared perspective of tell me what I need to know during the exam and I will perform and let's get over it. That's just a little part of it. But that is there, and it is okay that it is there, because you have a complicated life with all kinds of challenges and career stuff and family stuff and student stuff and credit point stuff. So I'm aware of that. Why? Because I was a student myself. It took me a little longer than you. So let's be very transparent in that sense. And that is the third thing. Now that that is part of you, I will try, let's say at least 33.333% of the time to actually discuss what can you expect in the exam. So all the sort of slides in workshops on questions for class discussions, the assignments, the paper, that is all sort of exam material. And let's see how we can sort of brainstorm, exercise your brain muscles. Let's exercise the vocabulary that is useful in a sort of professional relationship between economists and lawyers, and then the sort of quick and dirty rules and answers to exam questions. And my practice is in the corporate world, so I do deal with boards, shareholders, boards, people in companies. I used to serve employees, suppliers, so contract disputes, and regulatory issues, meaning the let's say interference of governmental agencies within the operation of enterprises, be it in financial services, medical services, educational services, and so on. We will touch upon that in week 8 in more detail. The connection between this course and your program is 100%, because corporate law, and especially the angle taken in this textbook, is of a economical science perspective. So what I hope is that you sort of recognize vocabulary as externalities, efficiency, aggregate welfare, and these type of stuff. And that makes you a much better audience for this book than regular law school students. Who in this class is also doing law school at the side? Not yet? Okay. Because traditionally, law school is not that brain muscle training like. It is, tell me the rules in the books. I make a stereotype, obviously, and with that we can solve cases, and all those perspectives on why are these rules there is not the dominant thread in law school. So that is why this book is not used in law school, because that is much too complicated for jurists. But I think in your third year you are a good audience for such an approach, because along the way you do get enough quick and dirty rules of certain jurisdictions, we will discuss that later, that makes it concrete. So I am very happy to be with you, because well, you are the future choice architects, so people who determine how it will look like. And one of the biggest messages of this course is that corporate law is made by human beings. And when I talk about human beings, I talk about you. So you will shape corporate law. And well, the major objective is that the analytical framework given in the textbook will be a sort of friend of you in the years to come. And I predict that out of many textbooks you had to swallow during your bachelor program, or that's a hope at least, that this one will be one of your favorites in time. What I also do, and this is a little bit mean, is that I explicitly state that you already had 4 courses in law. That means that I'm trying not to start at square one. So I do not see my course as a sort of standalone course, as in, well, let's talk about law, and that you have a blank slate in your brain. And on occasion that might mean that you have to dive into notes and material of previous courses when I declare that contract law is regarded to be known by you. And then there is a other item, and that is your prior skills development. You are involved in a sort of academic skills track, or I don't know the name exactly, but you have to have certain skills signed off in the course of the 3 years, and a few students do that with presentations and papers we do in this course. And what I take as a sort of assessment perspective is that you're almost a bachelor. So what I expect in the skills arena are full sentences and a sort of structure in oral and written contributions, with a sort of introduction, main part, and conclusion, and all kinds of other kindergarten instructions which are quite complicated and which haunt you until your master's and PhD and along. So please know that I take that quite serious, but that I take this course as a further exercise field for these skills. So try it out and use the feedback of your fellow students and myself for the further development. Because I know I'm an employer myself, or I used to be, so I do know how this recruitment process goes. And that is one of the metaphors I use in workshops to give you feedback. This is the picture of Mr. Kraakman, a scholar who assembled a team of scholars, lawyers, economists of 10-ish countries who took a sort of global universal research project perspective on corporate law, and who now in the 3rd edition produced this book. And that is quite exciting because the mainstream reality in law is that we are divided in 200 jurisdictions and that we are not discussing law across borders that much in the legal discipline. Completely unlike your own discipline. The economists' science is a global affair with Nobel Prizes, etc. And law is not. With the exceptions of a few new birds, and this is what I think the future. So that is also nice. Having said that, in the other classes, especially my office partner Michael Milo of the previous course, we share an office. There is a sort of scholarly approach to contract law or historical perspectives that is also including sort of perspective. But when I talk about this project, this is about hardcore, real laws in the specific jurisdictions, where sometimes when lawyers engage in science, that it become sort of very esoteric and non-concrete. So what I try is to make it concrete. And it is obviously a combination of empirical research in the field of economics and legal research, and this is the result. Well, we will be very explicit about the intended learning outcomes. This is a drawing I might discuss in the workshop. This is how I see education. So what we should do is make explicit what the overarching goals are and per week. So this week the goal is to understand what is the place of this book in your curriculum in law, in my career, in your career, and what are the 5 topics. That is the learning goal of this week. Meaning, quite concrete, that you should assess yourself at the end of the week, so by Monday coming, whether you could have little narratives on each of these subjects. We will exercise that on Thursday. And that means with little narratives that on each of that topic or keyword I produce in the course description, you're able to produce a little story for me, but later on for your mother-in-law, and then in 13 months after your, now that is then 16 months on your job interview after completing your master's, where your recruiter in a corporate setting would say, well, we are a firm and this is the main shareholder, and then there's a keyword, and then you might be invited to tell a little bit more about what is your view on shareholders. Well, this book is a museum on views on shareholders. So, and then to make it even more concrete, of around 120 seconds narrative, because then the recruiter wants to talk a lot. So 2 minutes, 3 minutes narratives, or other word for it is elevator pitches. You know the concept of elevator pitch? So what I will try, and inform me if I forget during the workshops, that we will try to exercise that. In the midterm assessment, also known as the paper, that is also a huge, including the presentation, a huge assessment on that level, and then obviously the body of knowledge is more focused in the final written exam. Well, corporate law. Corporate law is a name of a field which has also other names. And as we will discuss when we talk about legal personality in half an hour, the concept of a corporation could be compared to a body, as in that body has the power to be bearer of rights and obligations. So if you envision, if you picture an enterprise as a body, then you could put a link between the Latin word corpus, which means body, and the enterprise. And this is a name that is most commonly used in the United States. Then you could view a corporation as an assembly of investors. And then you look more at the shareholders, at the owners of that enterprise. And then if you picture all those shareholders, owners in a room, then you could put the name, they are in good company with each other, to it. And that is the name of exactly the same course in the United Kingdom, and of, for instance, the statutory act, the Act of Parliament, and including all those quick and dirty rules on companies, as the UK colleagues call a corporation. Then there is a third approach to corporate law, and that is that you look at the economic activity, the enterprise, the undertaking, the business, as an economic phenomenon, presenting themselves in various forms to you. In a corporate fashion with shareholders or without shareholders, in a partnership, in a sole proprietorship. And if you take that angle to the law regulating enterprises, then corporate law or company law are potentially a too limited name. And then you could embrace business law as a name for the course. And if you take that approach, and most of the time when not the legal rules as such are the main dish, but also how should you deal with enterprises, what are the steps to establish an enterprise, what happens if you run out of money and you face insolvency, bankruptcy, and these types of stuff, then educational institutions focusing on those goals call such a course business law. And then in Europe, in the European Union, the 28 member states, they are involved in harmonizing important aspects of corporate law of the member state. And then, a couple of decades ago, they tried to find a word that does not drive stakeholders crazy, lawyers in those member states, and they come up with the word undertaking. And undertaking is the least sexy word in science to describe enterprises and businesses and so forth. And the attempt of the EU legislators is to use that neutral word for their involvement in the business world, in an attempt to avoid that a lawyer in the UK or in Lithuania or in Italy or in Malta raises the fingers as well, but for us, corporate means this and this, or that business means this and this. And so they found a unused word in those member states, and they promoted that to the umbrella term. And funny enough, from a scholarly perspective, that is a perfect type of approach to name, to call your field. But since it is so unsexy, the word, nobody uses it. I tried to browse law schools and business schools in the EU, looking for courses with the name law of undertakings, and so far I didn't find it. But if you find a course of that, please send it to me, then I will send some flowers to them. Because from a sort of scholarly perspective, that should be sort of the proper word. How is this course called? Corporate Law and Regulation. So we put it in a sort of mixture where from a English-speaking British perspective, corporate law doesn't exist because it should be called company law. And corporate law is so American. So what I try, well, this name was already given by colleagues, but you could say that that taking a American perspective in the name gives a sort of scholarly overview in terms of EU. Well, then the regulatory approach. You could see law as just a means to an end, and that all the legal interventions could be called regulatory actions. So regulatory in the broadest sense of the word includes statutory laws, corporate law, company law act, case law of judges that complement legal rules in jurisdictions, the design of supervisory bodies, central banks, financial service authorities, the design of stock markets and intermediary agents and so forth. That could all be called regulation, which in itself is a complicated word because the users always have their own definition. But the broadest definition is that any intervention in the free market economy or capitalist economy is already a regulation in some sort. So I'm happy that the second term of the course name of this course is regulation. So corporate law and regulation. That suggests that we are aiming at this sort of scholarly, all-inclusive approach. Then two other approaches, namely the legal practice approach. What I like to do as an attorney at law is also make very explicit what type of lawyers are there out there, how much do they cost per hour, and what can you get out of them, because you will be their principals, you hire them. So what I try to tell you is what are you then hiring and what you should not hire and so forth. And I will make a map of it. And then secondly, what do they produce? What are lawyers actually producing? How does that look like? And that makes it very down to earth. So from a legal perspective, jurists make the deed in which the corporation is established. In civil law countries that is done by a civil notary, in other countries by another type of governmental agent. That is a piece of paper with text like, herewith we establish Unilever NV dot. And then you have Unilever. So that's a product. Another product is contract. Piece of paper with two parties, and what is on the contract? And a letter of advice. Well, your position is A, B, C. Those are the three products we talk about. So there's not sort of justice walking around in the corridor. We talk about jurists producing three types of products. And let's look at those three products. Then you know what a jurist is. And so forth, and so forth. Oh, and the societal approach, week 7. Very importantly, corporate social responsibility. Part of the regulation is driven by, let's call it externalities, and the concerns around those externalities. Yeah, a societal approach. So let's mix all those approaches in this course, and then, concrete, I can once in a while ask you if you give a type of presentation or contribution, elevator pitch, that I ask, what type of approach is it? What is the angle you're talking from? Or that I ask you, so please rephrase it now from a sort of lawyer's perspective. Or please rephrase it from a member of parliament who is changing corporate law perspective, societal perspective. So that you are able to have a multiple repertoire in terms of talking about corporate law and regulation. Okay. If I take such a broad perspective, then we should realize that there is a scholarly hidden perspective which I would like in 3 minutes to make explicit, and that is that there are basically 4 interests at stake. The private interest, symbolized with the icon with families, and children. Then the corporate interest, so the interest of the enterprises, also known as undertaking, also known as businesses, also known as companies, also known as corporation. Then the governmental interest. And with governmental interest, I mean the interest of those roughly 200 sovereign states, and if you reckon that many states are divided in federal structures, United States, Germany, China, all kinds of India, all kinds of major states divided in sub-states, then there are around 400 governments on the globe, roughly. And those are representatives of their territory, and all the discussions in the Netherlands, for instance, as a fiscal paradise, and we do that. Why? Well, because that is good for our territory, to cheat or to be clever or whatever normative label you would like to put on it. And so governments are, in that sense, not sort of neutral thingies above us, but sort of the representatives of interest groups. And then, last but not least, if you're not representing or within the realm of one of those 3 concrete interests, then I have a reserve group, and that is the general interest. So here you have academia, that should be not biased. Here you have Amnesty International, Greenpeace, and all kinds of other not-for-profit, non-governmental, hopefully not too biased organizations that reflect on the other 3. And I present this to you, and I called it the theory of commensurability, because from a scholarly perspective you could argue that nothing is certain and there's no truth, and that from a scholarly perspective you cannot say anything sensible about anything. So a very pessimistic Nietzschean type of perspective on reality. And I think that is an exaggeration, because these interests are real, in the sense that if you walk around on the globe and then you can hit your nose, your real nose, to those real interests. Picture, for instance, the tradition in France to strike. That is a interesting picture representing the clash between those interests. And so one of those ideas behind this course is that this is the starting point. Well, and then it becomes, and I call that actors. Those 4 parties are actors. And then you have influences on those actors of nature and culture and philosophy, and very importantly, choice architects. So economists, public managers and lawyers, and they are somehow in the driving seat of designing and making choices within the influences on the actors. And then you have 4 perspectives, goals to which those actors aspire, what they try to achieve, and there are a million goals, including metaphysical goals of serving God or other important things, and I choose 4 that make a scholarly discussion potentially helpful. And one in the left corner is the perspective of the enterprises, that is then to summarize with the word profit. Then the other perspective with the sweet baby feet is the perspective of the human being. Let's dub that with people. So your personal interest in a fulfilling life, including a career and a family and good health and so forth, which is a contradictory perspective of interest. Then you have the interest of the government, or it's not necessarily of the government, but a standalone interest that looks at, let's have a orderly society, because if not, you get a sort of Syria or equivalent countries. So the perspective, well, I don't know, I cannot choose between the prophet and the people, but let's somehow realize a meaningful compromise. And then last but not least, the general interest, as in the P of planet, potentially, if you look at Greenpeace or other interests. And when I talk about corporate law, please be aware that I see sort of the starting point of the epistemology, so the knowledge, and ontology, so the science of what exists, in this way. So I focus on actors, and I use the word actor in many occasions, and then I mean this. So that is just a way to make explicit where I come from, so that same story, different picture. So that you can also challenge my statements in a certain state. That you say, well, if you take those interests as starting point, how on earth can you say this and this? That makes a debate more fruitful and meaningful if you also disclose the most basic fundamentals. Okay. So within this view of reality, which is not a choice, so I'm not declaring that indeed the aggregate social welfare is the aim. Who knows? I'm only saying there are those 4 potential aims. There are many others, but you cannot say that that is just the accepted intention. And within that story, I identify 4 practices. So lawyers. So now I'm talking about the professional called lawyer or attorney at law or jurist or other names. And they come in 4 flavors. One flavor is those lawyers serving the interests of actor, private individual, symbolized by a family, or the lawyer serving the interest of the company, with nicknames as corporate lawyer, or in the Netherlands we have in the south of Amsterdam the so-called Zuidas, the corporate law firms serving the interest of the corporations, or very importantly, because those are your colleagues in the future if you end up in a corporation, being the in-house counsel, which is a name of yours like me who is just employed by a enterprise to on a daily basis serve that enterprise. Then the governmental practice, including independent lawyers rendering legal services to governments, but more importantly, all those jurists hired or employed by the state. And we know 2 famous types of lawyers of that type. One is the judge, employed by the state to settle disputes, and the other one is the public prosecutor, a lawyer hired by the state, tasked to prosecute criminals, including white-collar criminals. And then last but not least, jurists serving the 4th interest, the general interest. Those are the jurists, the scholars in academia, and lawyers within Amnesty International, Greenpeace, and all kinds of organizations like that. And then this we will discuss in the workshop. Let's move to your world. This is a picture of how I see, let's say, the introduction to economics in year 1, where you see the same interest. You say these are texts, these are, let's say, relationship arrows, and or money arrows, as in private individuals invest in corporations, their savings, and then via dividends they get return, or private individuals are employed by corporations and the salary flows back. And so this is, the arrows are money flows. Private individuals pay taxes to the government, and the government renders subsidies and other the same applies with corporations. And then you have international trade. Corporations trade with other parties in other countries, and private individuals trade with bol.com, amazon.com, trade with similar corporations in other countries. And this is sort of the real world money flows where corporate law also engage with questions like what type of corporations are most helpful in such a money flow organization. And it also represents this drawing the idea that all those actors are interrelated, and that also corporate law cannot stand alone just look at the enterprise, the undertaking alone, standalone, but also has to reckon, well, how does it work in relationship with the government and with the private individuals, and increasingly, week 7, corporate social responsibility, with all those drivers that put on the agenda, as in the Netherlands at this moment, how we should see the legal structures that allow for the dividends and this Dutch fiscal paradise type of image. And then my prediction is that it for those reasons will change. So now the perspective is it's all legal, and then those general interest drivers, they change the landscape by making it not legal anymore at a certain point. Will take another 25 years probably, but those are the developments if you look in the history of corporate law. Almost a break. Yes, right now. Let's have a 12-minute break. Is it enough for cigarettes, coffee, fresh air, and a reset of your brain? See you in 12 minutes. Thank you.